Vikings carried fire kits that smoldered for 3 days, glue so strong it sealed leaky boats, and backpacks that could haul 40 kilograms of supplies across frozen seas. What else did they invent that preppers still can't beat? This is 10 Viking tools that could save your life today, and you'll never look at ancient gear the same way again. The hand axe. They buried it with their dead, swung it to conquer kingdoms, and carved their homes with the same blade. Why did the Vikings trust one tool above all? Because the hand axe could decide life or death before sunrise. More than 80% of Norse graves contain an axe. That alone tells you it wasn't optional, it was survival in iron form. Some weighed 1.2 kilograms, others nearly 1.8, balanced so you could split logs, butcher a stag, or, if you were cornered, bury it in an enemy's ribs. They called it the bearded axe, because the lower blade curved like a hook, perfect for grabbing logs or twisting wood apart. Imagine winter in 9th century Norway, when a single storm could pile snow higher than your roof overnight. Without an axe, you wouldn't last 3 days. The steel often came from Frankish traders brought north across thousands of kilometers, but plenty was homegrown. Smelted from bog iron they dug from frozen marshes, that ore was heated, beaten, and folded until it turned into a blade that could stay sharp through a whole season of work. Each haft, made of ash or elm, was wrapped in rawhide to stop splitting when soaked. That simple detail could save you when you were weeks from any forge. If the edge dulled, they'd grab the whetstone always tied around their neck. A dull blade could cost your life. Ever try cutting firewood with a blunt axe when the wind is minus 20 degrees? You'll see in a moment why that little stone was almost as important as the blade itself. Even today, bushcrafters copy the Viking axe's shape because nothing balances power and precision like it. It's still used by campers and survival experts because when you need to chop wood, build shelter, or protect yourself, no fancy gadget beats a good axe. But if you think this was their only survival secret, you'd be wrong, because the next blade was so trusted, they wore it upside down for a reason. The Sayax knife Viking raiders tucked a blade into their belts so essential it became their signature. Archaeologists have recovered Sayaxes stretching anywhere from 7 to 24 inches long. Some were short, perfect for gutting fish or carving runes. Others were so massive they blurred the line between knife and sword. The shape, straight spine, sloping edge, looked upside down to outsiders. But there was logic behind it. That broad back added strength for splitting bone and wood. But why wear it edge up? The reason was speed. An inverted carry let you draw and strike in a single motion. If you were skinning a seal and an enemy charged, that Sayax became your last line of defense in less than a heartbeat. Metallurgical analysis shows many blades were pattern welded, layers of iron and steel hammered together to create rippling grain that looked beautiful but served a purpose, resisting fractures. Some had inlays of silver or copper. One famous Sayax from Grave 523 in Birka, Sweden, bore the maker's name spelled out in iron wire, proof these tools were personal treasures, not disposable knives. Their edges were kept keen with whetstones, some shaped like little rods for precise honing. Because in a Norse winter, when butchering a reindeer could mean the difference between starvation and survival, a dull knife was a death sentence. One saga hints at a more sinister use, a Sayax hidden under bedding, waiting for night when it could end a feud in one silent stroke. But its main power was simpler, everything from shaping bow staves to slicing barley bread. Even now, bushcrafters copy the Viking Sayax for camping, fishing, or food prep. It's like having a kitchen knife and a hunting knife in one. Stay with me, because in just a moment, you'll see how Vikings took a simple draw knife and used it to build ships strong enough to cross an ocean. If you think shaping a plank was easy in the 9th century, imagine this. No power tools, no clamps, no smooth lumber from a sawmill. Just your hands, a raw log, and a sharpened blade called a draw knife, one of the quiet heroes of Viking innovation. If you've ever tried to carve wood, this is the tool that makes it smooth. Even now, people use draw knives to shape bows, paddles, or tent poles. A typical Viking draw knife was 12 to 20 inches long, forged from high-carbon steel with wooden handles at each end. The edge curved subtly, designed to slice clean ribbons of wood instead of gouging. When building a longship, crews needed hundreds of planks, Each had to be tapered so precisely it sealed tight when overlapped, the famous clinker method. Too thick? The hull leaked? Too thin? It cracked. Many dangers lurked in every stroke. If the grain twisted suddenly, something that happened in about 1 in 4 oak logs, the blade could jam, snapping the edge or wrenching the handle from your grip. There's a story in the Gulleting Law about a builder whose draw knife slipped, severing 3 fingers. It was said you could tell an old shipwright by the scars zigzagging his hands. Draw knives weren't only for boats, they shaped sled runners, fence posts, and handles for spears and axes. One old Viking grave had a draw knife that was still sharp after 1,100 years. That's how well it was made. Some craftsmen even heated their blades in fish oil to temper them, a method that added flexibility without brittleness. And if you're picturing one Viking working alone, think again. Shipyards were bustling scenes with up to 40 men stripping planks, each with a draw knife in constant motion. Splinters flew like snow. Ever tried using a draw knife yourself? Even modern bushcrafters admit it takes weeks to learn. The Vikings had boys starting as young as 10, because if you couldn't shape timber, you couldn't build a boat. And without a boat, you were no Viking at all. Up next, you'll see why even the sharpest blade was useless without something much humbler. A small stone every Norseman carried, because a dull edge could cost you your life in a single day. Some say the most important Viking weapon wasn't an axe or sword, it was a whetstone the size of your hand, because one dull blade could end a raid, spoil a hunt, or leave you defenseless when danger struck. Archaeologists have unearthed over 700 Viking whetstones in graves across Scandinavia. Some were made of slate from Norway's Lærdal Valley, others of sandstone traded from Gotland. Each had a hole drilled through one end so it could hang by a leather thong, ready to use at any moment. A whetstone might look harmless, but using it wrong was risky. Imagine you're sharpening a sayax on deck in a storm. One slip, and that razor edge sliced straight through your palm. Records from the law of Frostathing mention fines for bloodshed from reckless honing. Every Viking learned to hold a precise angle, about 20 degrees, and work the edge in steady circles. If you got the angle wrong, your knife either chipped or just stopped cutting right. A skilled hand could restore an axe edge in under 10 minutes, even after hacking through bone or frozen timber. But whetstones weren't only for weapons, they touched everything. Draw knives, needles, fish hooks. One 10th century trader wrote that a blade that gleams is a man who thrives. That tiny stone was a symbol of readiness. Some whetstones were carved with runes for protection, blending magic with function. Others were passed down generations, father to son, because a well-kept whetstone could last 50 years. Even today, every good survival kit includes a sharpening stone, because in the wild, a dull knife is useless and dangerous. If you've ever wondered how Viking blades stayed deadly in rain and salt spray, it wasn't luck. It was the discipline of sharpening, every day, every journey. And what came next was just as vital. A glue so strong it could hold a long ship together through the worst storms. If you think duct tape fixes everything, you haven't heard how Vikings made birch tar glue so strong it held warships and weapons together. This sticky black resin started as ordinary bark. They dig a pit about 3 feet deep, line it with clay, then fill it with rolled birch bark, sometimes over 100 pounds. A fire burned above the pit for 8 hours straight, forcing sap to drip through a hole into a clay pot buried below. But it wasn't foolproof. If the fire burned too hot, the bark just turned into ashes and ruined the batch. Too cold, and you get watery pitch that fell apart in rain. Many disasters happened often. One saga describes how a winter glue batch froze into a useless brick. When done right, the tar was heated again and mixed with charcoal dust and animal fat to thicken it. The result? A waterproof adhesive that bonded wood, leather, and iron so well it could survive months at sea. Think of it like Viking superglue. And yes, it still works. Some wilderness experts even make birch glue today to fix shoes, tools, or cracked canoe seams. Sayax handles were wrapped in leather strips sealed with birch tar, making them grip tight even when wet. Shield edges were reinforced with strips of hide glued in place to stop splintering. And arrows? Each iron tip was secured with a dab of tar so it wouldn't snap off in battle. Birch tar even patched cracked boats. Archaeologists found traces on clinker planks of a 10th century Norwegian wreck, proving it kept leaking hulls afloat. Imagine relying on a sticky lump of black goo to save your life in a storm. No modern epoxies, no backup plan, just centuries of trial, error, and smoky pits that could fail with a single gust of wind. And if you think that sounds dangerous, The next tool had the power to start a fire in any weather. If you ever get stuck in freezing rain, you'll wish you had a Viking fire starter kit strapped to your belt. This wasn't some fancy gadget. It was a raw survival system made from flint, steel, and a lump of dried fungus called amadou. Vikings harvested amadou by climbing 60-foot birch trees to collect horsehoof fungus, then boiling it in wood ash for days to make it catch a spark. Climbing trees for fungus was dangerous. One wrong move and you could fall hard. When the fungus was ready, they'd slice it thin and store it in leather pouches with bits of dried grass. To make a flame, they struck steel against flint, showering sparks onto the amadou. But it wasn't instant. Records describe warriors huddling for 20 minutes in sleet, desperately coaxing embers to life. Mini disaster? If the fungus got damp, it turned to mush. If the steel chipped, you were stuck rubbing sticks, a method most Vikings called a last resort. What makes this kit extraordinary is how it could keep fire alive across oceans. Sailors carried glowing embers wrapped in moss and sealed in clay pots, keeping them warm for 3 days straight. Archaeologists in Denmark unearthed a fire kit from the 900s, still holding charred amadou. It had traveled from Norway, crossed the North Sea, and survived centuries underground, proof that even simple tools can outlast empires. Modern survivalists still use the same flint and fungus trick because lighters break, matches get wet, but this stuff still works in rain or snow. And while fire could save your life, the tools that forged iron were what built Viking power itself. Next, we'll step into the roaring forge and see how the bellows and tongs shaped a world of steel. Inside a Viking forge, temperatures could soar past 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit, 1,260 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt iron like candle wax. But this heat didn't appear by magic. It was created by hand, with double-chamber bellows and iron tongs that had to be controlled with split-second timing. Bellows were made from ox hide, stitched around wooden frames almost 4 feet, 1.2 meters long. Each push blasted air through a clay nozzle, fanning charcoal hotter than any open campfire. A single forge session could burn through 500 pounds, 226 kilograms of wood in a day. If you slipped and let the coals cool, the iron would harden too soon and crack, ruining hours of labor. Tongs were no less important. Blacksmiths crafted them in custom shapes. Broad, flat jaws for holding axe heads, narrow pincers for knife tangs. 2 people had to work together. One pumped air, one moved the blade. Historians found tongs buried at Kaupang, Norway, stamped with runes, like an iron signature proving the smith's reputation. Some tongs even had bronze reinforcements, evidence that Viking metalworkers were improving their gear centuries before industrial tools. One tale describes a smith forging 40 sea axes in a month to supply a raid, hands burned raw from handling glowing steel. And the bellows? They creaked like thunder, never pausing until the iron surrendered. You might not carry bellows in your pack today, but the idea's the same. Control fire, melt metal, fix your gear. In a real survival camp, forging tools still matters, but forging was just the start. To eat, Vikings needed tools that could pull dinner from the sea. Let's look at the hooks that fed entire villages. A single 3-inch iron hook could decide whether your family ate that week. Archaeologists have pulled Viking hooks from peat bogs, still razor sharp after 1,000 years. Some were made of bone, carved smooth enough to fool trout. Others were cold-forged iron, hammered flat at temperatures over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 1,093 degrees Celsius, then quenched in seawater. Vikings carried them in leather pouches alongside line made from horsehair or twisted flax. One sagas mentions a woman named Aud, who once baited 60 hooks before dawn, her entire livelihood resting on what she could catch. The process was brutal. Imagine hauling in a 40-pound, 18-kilogram cod while the North Sea sprayed ice water in your face. You slipped once and the iron hook could drive into your hand instead of a fish. Infection wasn't a possibility. It was a guarantee if you weren't careful. They used small hooks for river fish and big ones for deep-sea monsters like halibut. Small ones for river char, massive barbed hooks for halibut and shark. A single Viking longship often carried 200 hooks, each hand-shaped and counted before setting sail. The shape hasn't changed much. If you fish today, odds are you're using a design nearly identical to the Norse version. Even the eyes were twisted in the same spiral pattern you see on modern tackle. Fish hooks are still part of every survival kit today, and Viking ones weren't that different from modern ones. Hooks were so vital that some chieftains locked them in wooden chests, because losing them could mean starvation. But as crucial as food was, Vikings needed to light the darkness. Next, you'll see how they did it with rawhide and fat. In a world without batteries or bulbs, Vikings made light from stretched cowhide and animal fat. Imagine cutting thin slices of hide until you could see your own hand through them, then lacing them over a wooden frame no bigger than 12 inches tall. Inside, a bowl of tallow, rendered beef fat, held a twisted moss wick. Once lit, it burned for 10 hours straight, releasing a smell like scorched stew, but that smell meant survival. These lanterns were so reliable that ship crews often carried 4 or 5 per longship, each carefully shielded to avoid setting the sails ablaze. The hide diffused the glow, just enough to see your companions' faces without blinding you. One fragment found in a burial mound at Oseberg still had traces of soot inside, proving it was used right up until the owner died. Even kings relied on this simple technology. King Harold Bluetooth supposedly ordered dozens of rawhide lamps to be placed in his hall, so no corner was swallowed by darkness. The biggest hazard? If the fat boiled over, flames could leap 2 feet high, igniting the walls. That's why they always kept water nearby, just in case the lantern flared up. When the flame dimmed, a child's job was to trim the moss wick. One slip and the lantern died, leaving you in pitch black. Try lighting a flashlight in freezing rain. It won't last. But this Viking lantern, it glowed for 10 hours straight, even on the sea. But while a rawhide lamp could keep you safe after dusk, you still needed a way to carry everything you owned without dropping a single tool overboard. That's where the Gokstad backpack came in. When archaeologists opened the Gokstad burial mound in 1880, they didn't just find shields and swords, they uncovered a backpack built so cleverly it could put your modern-day hiking gear to shame. Made from over 20 pieces of steam-bent ash wood, it had rawhide lashings that could expand or contract depending on the load. The pack measured about 18 inches high and weighed around 8 pounds. 3.6 kilograms empty, light enough to carry for days, but strong enough to haul 50 pounds, 23 kilograms, of iron tools. Leather straps were stitched with sinew, not thread, because sinew shrinks when wet, tightening the seams instead of loosening them. If you were caught in a storm crossing the Norwegian fjords, this pack wouldn't soak through. Inside, Vikings packed everything from fishing hooks to flint fire kits and preserved dried fish. Historians believe some of these rucksacks even carried birch tar and sealed leather pouches, just in case you had to glue a cracked oar mid-journey. They packed everything: fire kits, fish hooks, even glue in that one bag. One wrong slip on wet planks could rip the pack wide open, sending everything tumbling into the freezing surf. That's why warriors practiced repacking their supplies over and over until they could do it blindfolded. Modern campers still admire the Gokstad design because it stayed dry, packed tight, and didn't break, even in a storm. Try doing that with your school bag. Every time you pull on your modern backpack, think about this. Over 1,100 years ago, Norse explorers had already perfected a design that kept them alive in wind, rain, and war. But tools were only half the story. What did Vikings actually do when temperatures dropped below freezing, with no fire, no backup, and no second chances? Click here to watch how Vikings survived the coldest nights of the year without heat. You'll never look at winter survival the same way again.